The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA's heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are the things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Hey, fans of freedom and open discussion, I'm heading over to Substack, and there's an ad-free audio and video version of the Adam Carolla Show that's going to be waiting there. In the near future, you'll even be able to watch ACS Live, unedited, as we record it, participate in the show via live chat. That'll be coming up very soon. You also get an ad-free version of the Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew Show. You'll also get an exclusive to my new podcast, Beat It Out, where I share unpolished ideas with my comedian buddies. The first series of episodes is going to be Jay Moore. You'll get all this and more for the low, low price of $9 a month, a pittance for all we're going to bring you. Subscribe now at adamcarolla.com/Substack, and I'll see all of you in our new speakeasy called Substack.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Major Brett.
Major Brett.
He causes major questions for me.
It's true. It's true. Very majorly questionable, no doubt.
But one deserving of the title, I suppose. Well, it has nothing to do with titles or major, and I'm really sorry, actually, if I offended all of our military men and women who've actually earned that title. I actually am very sorry, because Brett has earned none of that. And in fact, what does major even mean? Major, who knows? But today, we're going to dive into it. And if you're thinking deja vu, Alice and Brett have already talked about major questions, IEPA, trade. It's as if they could foretell what was going to happen at the Supreme Court. Do we have a crystal ball, Brett?
Yeah, I meant to go back and see what we said the final vote would be, because I couldn't remember exactly what we said. But I feel like we definitely called the outcome on this one.
We didn't. So obviously we're talking about the Supreme Court decision on the trade tariffs, learning resources versus Trump. Sorry, we get so excited about this season of SCOTUS that we sometimes just jump right in, forgetting that perhaps not everyone has been reading 100+ pages opinions about IEPA and trade that dropped maybe 2 weeks ago. But this is a very long opinion, obviously, and lots of different sections of the opinion. So I don't know that we called all the sections, because there are so many sections. People pair up in all sorts of ways, lots of concurring, dissenting opinions, and joining in part on section 1, but not 3, and an interesting mashup of justices voting together, shall we say.
Well, what was interesting is if you just look at the opinion, it looks like it's 200 pages long. But the majority opinion, the principal majority, is only like 25 pages long. It's actually pretty short. Because it doesn't take Justice Roberts, who wrote the opinion, a 6-3 opinion, striking down tariffs that you may recall were imposed by President Trump in response to a trade imbalance emergency that he had declared. And then under IEPA, which is a statute that during an emergency allows the president to take certain measures, and he said, one of the measures I can take is imposing tariffs, and that went all the way to the Supreme Court. We did legal briefs on it. If you need the background, you should listen to that. But yeah, so you have the main opinion, which is about 25 pages long. You have a concurrence by Justice Gorsuch, which is super long and basically just attacks another one of the concurrences. You have that concurrence, and then Justice Barrett also wrote a concurrence.
So part of the reason is some of you are like, why? Why are there all these writing things? So every discussion the Supreme Court has is really going to be on paper because it's not really for that instance. It's for where they think this opinion will go down the line, right? In some ways, it could close out certain arguments in the past, but there's different applications of where this will go later on. And the reason these concurrences can be so long, guess what? How many votes do you need to have a concurrence published? Just one. You can be a party of one. Whereas the 6-3 opinion, in order to get a majority, you probably have to be very concise because they all don't view the law the same way. And we'll dive into what that is and where they see kind of the logical ends of what this opinion will lead to. But in order to get basically a majority to sign on to an opinion, you usually have to be pretty tight in your reasoning. But concurrences, if somebody joins you, it's just icing on the cake. Otherwise, you can talk as long as you want because you don't have to convince anybody but yourself.
I think this was, and we talked about when we discussed this before the Supreme Court came out with their opinion, after the argument, we talked about how weird a case this was and how one of the difficulties about figuring this out was you had both the outcome, do the tariff stand or not, and then you had the reasoning that would be used, for instance, if you wanted to strike them down. I mean, if you wanted to strike the tariffs down, there were so many different ways you could go about it. And I think that's one of the reasons. Think about this. This is pretty rare to have this many opinions. I mean, you'll often have a concurrence, you'll often have a dissent. You know, maybe you have a couple concurrences. But in this opinion, Justice Roberts wrote the main opinion. Then you had Justice Gorsuch with a concurrence. Then you had Justice Kagan with a concurrence that was joined by Justice Jackson and Justice Sotomayor. Then you had Justice Barrett with a concurrence. That's 4 opinions concurring in striking down the tariffs. Then you had a principal dissent by Justice Kavanaugh and another dissent by Justice Thomas. 6 of the 9 justices wrote an opinion. The only ones who didn't, Jackson and Sotomayor. They just all joined something. 6 different written opinions. That's a lot. People thought this would come out earlier than it did, and it took a while. And people wondered why that was. And that's why, because you had all these different opinions going back and forth. And they always, you send a copy of your concurrence or your dissent or whatever to all the other justices. So you'll see in those opinions, they are arguing with each other about what they've written in the various opinions. It's just as like a window into the court. It was pretty fascinating.
And because of that, it is constantly changing, right? Because you do see these opinions talk to other opinions. As they get edited and changed, they change opinions. And so, I mean, I've not clerked on the Supreme Court, but I've clerked on courts of appeals where we've done en bancs. We've had friends who clerked on the court. There have been like 11th hour where someone changes a line and then everyone, goes back to the drawing board because that line really mattered and everyone's pulling it from the presses and quite literally making last minute changes until the very last minute that you have to send the opinion to the presses to be printed, right? And so that's what's fascinating about this. It's not shifting sands, but rather it's like the whole opinion, not just the majority opinion. It's like a living, breathing body, all speaking to each other. Because what if I like to think this, when one justice is, say, tearing apart another justice's, it's usually if they're on different sides, right? The dissent says this, this, and this. In some parts, before they go to publication, what they're kind of trying to do is to show the absurdity of that opinion. They'd love to publish it. But wouldn't it be more even amazing if in circulating that draft, they were able to get that justice to back down from that opinion in some ways, maybe shave back their opinion. So there's a lot of, this is more than 3D chess happening with these opinions.
And what is so crazy about this one? So you do have a strong dissent, which completely disagrees with the majority. But the fighting is mostly amongst the people who agree with each other. So you basically have Justice Roberts, he writes that main opinion, which people join. But 3 of the justices, the 3 more liberal justices, So you have Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson. They join in essentially
the outcome.
Holding. Right.
Right. That's it.
The tariffs are
bad
and can't be done. But the reasoning is completely different. And Justice Gorsuch spends his entire concurrence going after them and after Justice Barrett, who oftentimes, and this is another one of those instances, is just kind of on an island unto herself. We've seen this several times where you got everybody's fighting and then Justice Barrett is like off with sort of a kind of a very technical opinion on what's happening.
And no shade thrown at Justice Barrett, but it totally fits the prototype of her background, which is that she's a law professor. And this is actually what you do in the academy, right? Like, you only publish articles, really, on like a nuanced reading of the law that no one else has written about. That's why it gets published. It's not because it's like the mainstream opinion, because if it is, everyone is jumping on board and they've already published it. So not saying that what she's writing about isn't necessarily right, but she's been trained, and that's what she's done her entire career, is to find the avenue that no one else sees. And maybe, you know, for better or worse, sometimes it may or may not fit outside of the ivory tower, may not, you know, actually work with respect to like in practice what this looks like.
And we're going to go through the case, but
this whole thing, this like little p political interaction of what you concur in and how you join opinions matters, right? Because without the three traditionally described as more liberal justices joining, you don't have a majority. You don't have this holding necessarily. And so it was important, even if they don't agree with the majority's reasoning, Roberts's reasoning, they had to have joined in order to strike down these tariffs. And that's exactly what happened. The tariffs were struck down. We've talked so much, in case you missed it, they were struck down. And it's the main reasoning for this. This is not the concurrence. This is the majority reasoning, is it's based on just two words, separated by 16 others in Section 1702 A1B of IEPA. It's IEEPA. I now forget what it stands for. It's the Emergency Powers Act. And those words are regulate and importation. We went into this in excruciating detail on a previous legal briefs. So the president asserts the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country of any product at any rate for any amount of time. Now, what Roberts says is those words cannot bear such weight.
I hate this. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. I'll just start off. So Roberts writes this whole sentence. I absolutely despise it. Like, I do not understand. And this is so Roberts. And I don't know if this is his clerks or what, but this is how he starts the entire argument on whether the tariffs stand or not. And to me, it is such an incredibly weak argument because it's not even his actual reasoning. You know, he lays this out just based on two words separated by 16 others. What difference does it make how many words separate them? I mean, is he saying that because remember, the way this statute is set up is it's like the president may regulate, blah, 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 blah. It's just all these different things he can do. It's these different tools
really
he can
broad,
use.
If you remember, really broad powers, and they get broader and broader.
Really broad. And they're laid out in no particular order. It's just his various different powers. It's a complete coincidence that importation is 16 words away from regulate. So does that mean if importation had been just as a complete coincidence when they wrote the statute, if they had put importation first, so that importation was right next to regulate, would then all of a sudden the president have the power to do it? And if not, what difference does it make if it's separated by 16 words?
Right. I mean, are we doing a math problem that if it's certain number of words, like we better alert Congress that that's how they're using their judicial power, right? Like maybe 15 words, under 15 words is going to put you at the like, can bear some weight, but like within 10 words, it can bear a lot of weight. And what does that mean? Cannot bear such weight. That actually means nothing.
This entire sentence was written to be quoted in the press. That's why they wrote this, because it's snappy and it's like fancy or whatever. That's why they wrote it. And then from that point forward, they don't even talk about that. Like the actual arguments they make are the good arguments that actually explain to you why it might be the case the president can't do this. But this framing of the reasoning, like I said, the first thing you see in the reasoning section of the opinion is it's just trash. It's complete trash. And it's disappointing that this is how this opinion starts, because it's not how it should start. Now, when he actually gets past the thing I want to see in the New York Times, he then gets into the actual arguments, which are good arguments and are the arguments that we told you about the first time. So he begins with the idea that tariffs are clearly taxes, which they clearly are, and that the founders placed the taxing power exclusively with Congress, which they clearly did. And so then the question becomes, when IEPA delegates the power to regulate importation, does that give the power to tariff to the president? So we talked about this some too. There's this whole non-delegation doctrine, which has never really had any teeth to it. Everyone thinks it can, that there's a circumstance in which it can. We wondered if this might be the circumstance. That is not what they say. We'll talk about that more in a second. But if it is the case that Congress can delegate the tariffing power to the president, did they do it here? Because if they did, then he can do the tariffs. Even if Article 1 gives the tariff power to Congress, they may be able to delegate it to the president. And Robert says no. And the reason he says no is not because there were 16 words in between regulate and importation. It's because of the major questions doctrine, which we have talked about before. If you remember, when we discussed President Biden's student loan relief, we talked about the major questions doctrine. In that case, President Biden attempted to forgive a large amount of student loans based on some rather vague language. And the court said, look, if you're going to forgive $1 trillion worth of loans, that is a big deal. If Congress meant to give you the power to do that, they would have made it express. This is the whole idea of the major questions doctrine. The court's not going to read into ambiguous statutory text extraordinary delegation. So if Congress wanted the president to have the power to impose tariffs at whatever rate, for whatever duration he wants to do it, they would have said so. And they didn't. So, for instance, if regulate had been one word and 17 words later it had been tariff, he would have had the power to do it, because in that circumstance, Congress would have expressly delegated it. Since they didn't say tariff, that means you have to rely on the ambiguity of regulate importation, and we're not going to say that that ambiguity can carry all this weight. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too.
You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. So this is a big deal. We had talked about whether they would invoke the major questions doctrine. And this is really interesting because it's essentially, we didn't know what the reasoning would be here. But all they're saying is we're not going to dive into whether they can delegate. But if they're going to delegate, they have to be incredibly explicit here, because let's also look at IEPA. IEPA didn't do this, and no president before has used it to impose tariffs. And so that's kind of a post hoc reasoning, right? Like, it's possible to have a power that's been explicitly delegated but never exercised before. But they're looking at history and saying it's never been used in that way. But if you remember from our last legal briefs, there was a president, President Nixon, who did impose tariffs, but they distinguished that to say that Nixon's tariffs were much less sweeping. It was much less long lasting. They were not nearly as significant, because if you remember, the current president they're pretty sweeping. Not pretty sweeping. They're pretty much as sweeping as they can get, kind of grouping together parts of the country all together with like 10% tax or tariffs, which are now taxes. That sort of a grouping.
You can also say another incredibly weak part of the reasoning of this opinion. Can he do tariffs or not? Because if your argument is, well, Nixon, yeah, okay, fine, he did it. And he did it in the same language in the predecessor statute. But, they weren't as big a tariffs. They weren't as long lasting. Okay, so are you saying...
So is it major question doctrine delegation or not?
Yeah, so if the president had imposed 5% tariffs for 30 days under IEPA, he could do that? is that what you're saying? Because when you talked about major questions, it didn't seem like that's what you're saying. And the reason, I mean, honestly, they would have been better off just to say, yeah, Nixon did it, but that was unconstitutional.
He was wrong
too.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, trying to distinguish this is a real weakness because it seems to say, okay, fine, maybe in certain circumstances you could use tariffs, but not this one. And that one doesn't really make any sense. Like, they should have just said it's wrong.
And this is what we say in terms of, I mean, opinions do this too. We always say it's better to attack head on any weakness in your reasoning or your argument if you're the advocate, rather than just trying to say that you win everything. What they're trying to do here is this was a really compelling argument, oral argument in the briefs, and they want to address it. But to address it in this way, I think undercuts the major questions, because the major questions reasoning is black or white. It is explicit or it is not. And that is it. There's not like, the joke is like, you're not a little bit pregnant. Like, you either got delegated the powers or not. And it shouldn't matter the degree in which the power was exercised to then turn. It's not like if you exercise it a little, major questions is it implicated. It applies or it doesn't.
So Joe raises an interesting question, which I think is worth discussing. What is the majority opinion in this case?
There isn't one.
Is it Roberts? What's the controlling opinion? Why is it Roberts? There's one reason why Roberts' opinion is designated the majority opinion, and it's not because he got the majority of the votes for his reasoning. It's because he's the Chief Justice. So guess who gets to assign the opinion when they're in the majority? The Chief. So by virtue of being one of the 6 votes to strike down the tariff, he got to assign who wrote the opinion. He assigned the opinion to himself. He then wrote an opinion that only Justice Gorsuch joins. I mean, Justice Barrett, I forget how exactly
like
she phrased her
parts,
joining.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe it was like in solidarity. It was some weird way of joining.
Because Gorsuch, or the Chief, it's straight major questions, and it's short. It's a short opinion. It's basically, and I'll read you how he concludes. The president, and look, unlike much of the opinion, this, I think, is a fairly, okay, fine. The president asserts the extraordinary power to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited amount, duration, and scope. In light of the breadth, history, and constitutional context of that asserted authority, he must identify clear congressional authorization to exercise it. That's major questions. You did a big thing. You didn't point to clear congressional authority to do it. Therefore, under the major questions doctrine, that's out. Gorsuch is like, right on, brother. I'm with you 100%. But everybody else, so the 3 liberal justices, they don't believe in the major questions doctrine. So they don't think there's any such thing as the major questions doctrine. So they agree with the Chief, but they claim we're doing this just under standard statutory construction. So basically, just using the tools of statutory construction, we're saying there's not a power to tariff. Because now I'll say this, it's a little unclear what exactly that means, particularly when you compare their opinion here to things they've written in the past, which is what Gorsuch spends his entire time doing. Gorsuch is basically like, look, I mean, Gorsuch, the thing about Gorsuch,
he's that guy in class who takes all the notes, and he probably makes you feel bad about any time that you take an inconsistent position because he's read everything you've written and he knows the law forwards and backwards.
He has no problem calling you out on it. And that's what he does.
That's what he does.
I mean,
that's what he does here.
It's really hard to square what Kagan writes in this opinion with what she wrote in the student loan opinion from President Biden. Because honestly, there's not a lot of difference between them. In both cases, you have a president who's asserting $1 trillion authority based on some pretty shaky text. And in one of them, where she agrees with the president, she says that's fine. In the other one, where she doesn't agree with the president, she says, can't do that. And Gorsuch is like, how do you make this distinction? Like, how can you, and he quotes her. He's like, quotes what she wrote in the dissent from the student loan case. And he compares it directly to what she wrote in the concurrence in this case. And it's pretty damning. I mean, he
takes it down.
He pulls no punches.
It's a very good piece of advocacy, right? He lays it all bare for how inconsistent their positions are, or how they can't be squared away here. And ultimately, they joined here because they did not agree with the tariffs, right? But the reasoning, absolutely, and they wanted the power to be available in the student loan context. And if that was the case, then they can't have the major questions doctrine be a real thing. And we've always talked about, who believes it exists or it doesn't. It's not exactly written in stone somewhere. And I don't know, reading it, I would have blushed if I were Kagan, saying, well, yeah, I did write all those things, but this is different because it's Trump, because it's terror. Like, what is the way that you can square the two opinions?
And Gorsuch, he's got the advantage of being able to say, look, I was against it when it was President Biden. I'm against it when it's President Trump. And I'm against it for the same reason. So, he has the high ground, as Obi-Wan would say. Like, it's very difficult.
He's like, no matter if it's something I like or don't like in terms of the policy, I'm consistent. And that's supposed to be where the law is, right? The law stands no matter based on the outcome. And so he does have the high ground there.
And then once again, you've got sort of Justice Barrett's very strange way of approaching it. And if you read her concurrence, you can tell changed a lot after Justice Gorsuch wrote his, because she starts off basically defending herself against Justice Gorsuch, because she's got this opinion that's essentially like, it's kind of like Kagan's, but it's different. I don't know. It's hard to describe. She says major questions is like a flavor of
like an idea,
statutory interpretation. Yeah, it's
not its own category, but it's like a shade of statutory interpretation. I'm like, huh?
So
like you just sprinkle some glitter on it? And
yeah, she doesn't agree with Justice Kagan, I don't think, in her approach. Because Justice Kagan, once again, her approach is just, you read the text, you apply the standard tools of statutory interpretation, and that leads you to the conclusion the president can't do this. That is her approach. We don't need major questions. And, I mean, Justice Barrett kind of says that in a way. I don't know. I'll just say I'm at a loss. I don't really know how to explain the precise distinction between what Justice Barrett asserts that she's not saying that. She is not saying what Justice Kagan says in her concurrence.
And this is where maybe inside baseball came in. I think it got murkier as she responded to Gorsuch's opinion. I think whatever edits she made, I didn't understand exactly where the distinction was. But like you said, she said, I don't agree with what Kagan is saying. But then there's this big dissent. So Justice Kavanaugh wrote the dissent and basically points out the inconsistency in Roberts' opinion, which is, you're saying major questions. Major questions is very clear. You can't read ambiguous text to have an explicit delegation unless there's an explicit delegation for major questions. And he says, look, we know Nixon did it. You said it, but you're saying like a degree of what it is, but that's not what major questions is. Major questions is black or white. And so if Nixon could do it, then guess what happened? The courts didn't strike it down. And in fact, Congress watched Nixon do it. And they didn't say, whoa, we never intended to give you that power. He did it, no matter what degree, but he did it. And instead, Congress passed IEPA after Nixon had exercised this tariff power. And IEPA is, the subsequent statute that came after it that Nixon used. And so they used basically the same language that Nixon relied on in order to impose those tariffs. So they were in a position of having seen what Nixon had done, and they were able to change the language or be explicit about not allowing Nixon to do it if they didn't like what he did, because that's how the three branches are supposed to talk to each other, right? Like, whoa, that's not the statute said. So we're going to pass a new statute and be very clear about the power that we let you. But there's this implicit agreement with how the statute was interpreted by the executive branch when they saw Nixon exercise that power and still use the same language to pass the next act. Nixon depended on the predecessor. And because of that reasoning, it's a logical reasoning, then Trump can do it too. And so that's the inconsistent. And I am surprised that Roberts didn't change his opinion in response to Kavanaugh's dissent, attacking that point, because it's a compelling point that he makes. And also for the inside, Roberts and Kavanaugh grew up together as legal minds. So they're contemporaries. They knew each other well before either of them were on the court. And so they're very close, both in the way they think about the law, but also in terms of their professional lives. They've known each other the majority of their professional lives. So it is very often actually that Kavanaugh talks to Roberts in his opinions and vice versa. And this one, he's calling him out specifically on the Nixon example. So because Nixon did it, IEPA was passed after Nixon did it with the same language, then Trump can do it too, is what the dissent argues.
And the thing about Kavanaugh is he's seen as something of a chief whisperer, that he has.
He
as
might
Alice said,
have called himself that, though.
He might have called himself that. Yeah, I was giving him credit for being.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I love you, Justice Kavanaugh. I'm so sorry for offending you, but like, who calls him that? Maybe it might be Justice Kavanaugh.
Yeah. Anyway, so chief whisperer, and this is a circumstance in which he's trying to whisper to the chief, like, hey, this is a big weakness here. Like, maybe you should change your vote, or you need to at least address this. And this is actually, it's in Kavanaugh's dissent where my frustration with basically everyone in this case really comes out, because I think Kavanaugh is right in that if it is the case that Nixon did this, Nixon imposed a tariff under a delegation of authority from Congress on the basis of these two words separated by 16 other words or whatever. Like, if that's the case, which no one seems to deny it is, Justice Roberts poo-poos it. And then Justice Roberts, he does something else that also doesn't matter. He says, well, we never passed on that. Supreme Court never said it was okay for Nixon to do it. Guess what? You don't have to, because Congress did. Congress, when they passed IEPA, looked at what Nixon had done, and they endorsed it by keeping the same language. Even though we all know IEPA was meant to restrict people like Nixon. So the fact that they did it after Nixon did what he did and didn't change the language or make it specific that the president can't tariff is a really powerful argument that they're giving the president tariff powers. And Kavanaugh says, to use the familiar vernacular of Justice Robert Jackson in Youngstown Steel, which is another case we talked about this before, the president argues that this case falls into category 1, where the president is acting pursuant to an express or implied authorization of Congress. It's really hard to argue against that. But the way you argue against it is the non-delegation doctrine. Like, this should have been, I feel like everybody chickened out on this case. This should have been a non-delegation doctrine case. Maybe the non-delegation doctrine case. Because the problem here is, I think Congress really did give the president that power when they passed IEPA and endorsed what Nixon had done. But I don't think they can. I don't think Congress can give away such a massive express Article 1 power to the president. I just don't think they can do that. And if they do it, then that statute is unconstitutional. And that was the clean, doctrinally solid, intellectually honest way to attack this. But no one does it. It's just the chief doesn't have the guts to do it. Gorsuch loves the major questions
I also
doctrine.
think that there's a possibility that the three liberal justices may have thrown such a... I think it may have been between those. They're like, okay, we can sign on to an outcome with a major questions doctrine, but don't you dare touch my non-delegation. Because,
that's possible.
Because you remember what's been on the chopping block. This is, last season of SCOTUS, we talked about administrative law, right? Like, when you can rely on administrative agencies on interpreting regulations, whether they're able to do so much with their power, there's already a lot of question about what can be delegated and what cannot be delegated. It's incredibly hot, and it's an area that I just don't think that the chief is ready to delve into quite yet. But it's really funny because Kavanaugh does address it, and he's like, look, this is where it should have gone. I'm just going to cut it off at its knees because non-delegation doctrine doesn't apply here. You know why? Because this is foreign affairs, and foreign affairs is squarely within executive power. So it's funny because he's looking down the line and be like, if you guys ever get to the real reasoning here that could apply, I'm just going to stake out my position that non-delegation doctrine, it doesn't work here.
And I don't think there's anyone on the court who agrees with me on this, because Justice Thomas, I mean, his concurrence is basically like, Congress can delegate whatever they want. I mean, he's got some limits to it, but he doesn't really believe in the non-delegation doctrine. He's basically, his opinion is, which surprises me. I'm going to be honest with you. It kind of surprises me, but he does. He basically says, Congress can delegate anything they want. Here they delegated the power to tariff. You're saying they can't tariff, therefore you're wrong, therefore I'm in dissent. Justice Alito obviously didn't comment on this. Justice Kavanaugh, as Alice said, takes a very pro-executive power position, particularly when it's in foreign affairs, and this is foreign affairs, even though, once again, it's a foreign affairs power explicitly entrusted to Congress, which I think makes a difference. It's not as if Congress has no authority in foreign affairs. they have tons of
shared.
authority.
That's why there's actually the three branches, right?
Yeah.
There's checks
They
and
are the ones who
balances.
declare war, as we talked about in the war powers thing. I mean, they have a lot of foreign powers authority. And then, I don't know what Justice Gorsuch thinks about non-delegation. Obviously, the chief is never going to do that. And then you have the other three. So I think I'm basically alone on an island. But I think that's one of the reasons that this opinion, in a lot of ways, if you really sit down and think about it and you really parse it out, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. Like, there's some real holes in the majority's position that I think are very difficult to paper over the way the chief attempts to do it. And I think Kavanaugh really calls him out on it for not taking the step he needed to take to say, no, Congress could not give this power to the president.
And as a result, what does this all mean? Basically nothing except the tariffs are struck down. That's basically it.
But these tariffs under this law.
These tariffs, you're actually, because maybe smaller ones that look more like Nixon's are okay. Like how
the
would
president, he immediately came out and said, well, there's this other statute. So tariffs are back under that statute. So they're going to have to relitigate that, right? And this was even raised in argument, and the court dodged it, which they often do that. They don't like to answer questions that aren't before them. But given that we all knew that was going to happen, it wouldn't have been the worst thing for the court. And the court also dodged whether they had to pay them back, which we talked about was the hardest question.
Okay, so that is actually probably the hardest question, right? Because we're talking about billions.
At least
Close
billions. To $1 trillion.
I was going to say maybe trillions of dollars. And that, I love this because it's this is the classic, like, set off a bomb and just like walk back and be like, whoa, you're going to have to clean that up. Because if the tariffs are struck down, then there's obviously the question of like, well, what happens to all of these other, if you're saying the major question doctrine, except it's not the majority opinion, these tariffs were wrongfully implemented, then they should never have been implemented at all. So all of these tariffs were wrongfully taken, then they should be paid back. That's typically what happens. But how would you unwind that crazy ball of yarn? Like, it's almost impossible. And so technically, the courts below have to figure it out. And they have nothing to point to.
Which they're in the process of doing. And so, it goes to like the trade, like International Court of Trade or something, or the Federal Circuit, or the, I don't even know which one deals with all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, you got to pay it back. And the position of the government's like, nah, because we're just going to do them under this other power. So therefore, since we could have done them under that power, and this is like, what do you think of this reasoning? I mean, I'm seriously curious about this. So like, it's kind of like, we have this with searches sometimes. So let's say you pull somebody over and you search their vehicle and you find a gun. And then later on, the court says, you didn't have probable cause to search the vehicle, or whatever you need for under the automobile exception. And since you didn't have that, we're going to suppress the gun. And then you're like, wah! But we towed the car. And since we towed the car, we would have done an inventory. And if we'd have done an inventory, we would have found the gun. So therefore, inevitable discovery comes in. And the court's like, okay, you got me. And it comes in. I mean, that's the way it works. Like, it would still come in. So in this circumstance, you have the administration basically saying, okay, fine. We did IEPA. That didn't work out. But guess what? We have, Section 302 or whatever it is, tariffing power under the Smoot-Hawley tariff. And so that's what we're invoking now to do the same thing. So we get to keep the money. And the court is saying, no, since you didn't invoke that initially, you can't rely on it now. And it's sort of is that true? And so now that's going to have to make its way up through the courts to figure out whether or not, number one, that alternative tariffing power is allowed, which, I mean, it's just, since it's not a non-delegation issue, I guess it's just whether or not Congress was clear. And if it was, does that support some or all these tariffs? Which tariffs does it support? Does the tariffs that it doesn't support, do those need to be refunded? How do you figure out which ones fall into that category? I mean, it's a nightmare to untangle. Absolute nightmare.
But they didn't even try to untangle it. So it's not their problem right now, is their view. So there you go. Clear as mud. But you can go read the 200 pages.
Yeah. I mean, it's 200 pages long. It's 170 pages long. And it's worth reading. It's interesting. There's a lot of different arguments. Justice Barrett, you can read her whatever with Justice Gorsuch. I mean, it's funny because if you look at her concurrence, it is so, I just pulled it up. it is so focused on Justice Gorsuch at this point. It's kind of hard to imagine what it originally looked like. I would like to see the original concurrence that she wrote that drew Justice Gorsuch's ire, that then resulted in her writing the concurrence that ended up in the opinion. Because it is basically every paragraph is about what Justice Gorsuch was saying about what she had written previously. So pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. All right, Alice, you have anything else on tariff power for now?
No. Should we answer some questions?
Sure. Why not? As we've said, basically every episode, if you've been listening for the last couple years now, if you leave a 5-star review and you ask a question, we will respond. So leave those 5-star reviews, ask a question. You can do so on either the prosecutors or the prosecutors' legal briefs. Okay, let's see. This is from Valerie. Valerie wants to know, do law enforcement agencies really fight over which agencies will cover cases like they do in TV and the movies?
Not in the way that you think. Usually, I mean, we actually have this conversation with multiple people working in different agencies. Of course, there can always be tiffs, but more likely than not, law enforcement agencies are trying to work with each other because they're repeat players. And honestly, everyone has so much work to do that they're not exactly fighting for work. They're just trying to do their job and do it well. And so there's ways of operating because you know you're going to work together again. And there's different things that people excel at. Like the FBI has resources with the way they're able to trace bullets and guns and DNA and funding for those types of, forensic analysis that maybe a small local law enforcement agency doesn't. And so it would make sense for them to have their comparative advantages and work together in that way. And so it's not fighting in the way that you see, like, I refuse to give you information. This is my town. I've never personally seen that because it doesn't behoove you to do that when you're going to be possibly working on cases for years together and also on God knows how many different investigations.
And I'll say that's the rule. And I will say probably 99% of the time that's true. And honestly, the truth is most people are trying to give cases away. Like, if you want a case and you call up a local DA and you're like, hey, we're going to prosecute this one federally, chances are that guy's going to be like, thank you so much. I will knock that off my list. I didn't want to deal with it anyway. Same thing if you have a couple different U.S. attorney's offices who are interested in a case and the other guy wants to do it. It's like, good luck. If you need any help, let me know. Like, that's generally what's going on because everybody has so many cases and so much to do. Now, having said that, where you might see this are in the more higher profile cases. If you have a really high profile case, you might have a little bit of fighting. I think you're seeing a little bit of that in Luigi Mangione case, where it seems like the state and the feds are both really pushing to try that case. And it almost seems like neither one wants to give, and so they're going to have two trials very close to each other, that kind of thing happening. You might be seeing that some in the Guthrie case, where you have the sheriff who is very sort of public-facing, and then you have the FBI who's also involved, and you wonder exactly what's going on there. And I do think you probably see that more in the really high-profile stuff when, for whatever reason, one of the sides really wants to do something. And honestly, I mean, think about the different sort of incentives. And we talked about this a little bit when we talked to Julia about the Guthrie case. You have an elected sheriff on one side, probably an elected prosecutor as well. And then on the other side, you have the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, who are not elected, who generally aren't as public-facing. I mean, the FBI is often public-facing, but nevertheless, right? So you might have a local person who is really interested in showing just how tough they are on crime, really wanting a case, and so you might see some friction there. But I would say the vast majority of the time, you don't have that. Okay. So this person wants to know, and you may have some insight on this as well, Alice. I'm headed to Boston for my bucket list trip to see the Red Sox and the Patriots. What are the must-do things while I am there?
Well, you got to go first because you actually lived in Boston.
Yeah, so I love Boston so much. Number one, if you're probably going either in the spring or the fall. I mean, if you're going to try and hit the Patriots and the Red Sox, then I guess you're going in the fall, which is a great time to be in Boston. September in Boston is amazing. It starts getting cold around October, but awesome place, wonderful town. It's going to be beautiful in the fall if that's when you're going. They have like a walk you can do through Boston that takes you to various Revolutionary War places. So, you go to see the Old North Church, and you go to the burial ground, and you see where Paul Revere is buried, and here's a statue of this person, and here's where they argued about this thing, and here's where they decided to go dump the tea in the harbor. Like, all that stuff is just awesome. So do that. You can get a guide. They dress up like, Revolutionary garb or whatever. They're really good. It's really awesome. It's usually beautiful that time of year. And just walking that trail, awesome. So I would definitely say to do that. There's a lot of great food in Boston. A lot of great places to eat.
Cannolis are so good there.
If you go to the North End, where the Old North Church is, that is the Italian section of town. Fantastic Italian food, and that's where you can get awesome cannolis and other sort of baked goods. You go to Mike's Pastries and check it out. Awesome. I mean, I would say Boston it's a very walkable town. It's so walkable. You can walk from one end of it to the other with no problem. It's just a great place to see. It's a gorgeous town. It's got a lot going on. Do that if you have time. You know how I love Salem. Salem's just down the road. If you can get down there, do it. That's another really awesome place. I mean, the thing about Massachusetts, there's just so much history. I mean, there's history everywhere. It's just pouring out of that place. So do that. Go to Harvard. It's cool. Go to Cambridge. Check it out. If you want restaurant recommendations, shoot me an email. I mean, I'll say this. This is going to seem strange because this is not very Boston. But there is a place, I assume it's still there. I hope it's still there. In Cambridge, it's actually in Somerville, called Dali. And it is a tapas place. And it is amazing. I mean, one of the best restaurants I've ever eaten at. Incredible place, incredible atmosphere, fantastic food. Just go to Harvard, walk down the street till you get there, go there. Awesome.
Yeah, it's just one of those towns that like seeps with history and beauty. I've lived in mostly towns that don't have that. Like, I love Houston, but it's a lot of concrete and there's not a lot of history in terms of, wow, this was like what the colonies looked like. I love the fall because I grew up without fall colors. And so anytime it's fall, spring is also beautiful. Really year round is beautiful. I loved July 4th in Boston. That was one of the best July 4ths I've ever had, was in Boston. But I think walking is key. Being able to see everything, the cobblestones, but beneath your feet, the old churches, walk into every church that you can or every old building that is open to you because it's just beautiful to see a piece of history. You'll get a lot of steps in.
If you're there between October 2nd and October 12th, the Topsfield Fair will be going on in Topsfield, Massachusetts. It is America's oldest county fair. It started in 1818. It's awesome. Across the street from it, by the way, is where one of the witches from Salem lived before she was executed, because actually Topsfield is old Salem. So at the time, Salem extended that far. So you can both go to the fair, which is great, and maybe feel the spirits of the age. You can drive out to Walden Pond if you want to, and think and maybe read a book or something. I don't know. You can't go wrong. So do it all. All right. Well, unless you want to answer another question, I think that's all I got for today.
That's all I got as well. Well, thank you guys for listening and hope you enjoy reading the opinion after listening to this. And I say that with no sarcasm. I think it's really important that we read the opinions like this so that they're accessible. They are accessible to you. They're available publicly online. And if you have any questions or you disagree with us, let us know. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Thank you for coming to Brittany's birthday party.
You're welcome.
That was so nice. I know what it, like, that's a better birthday present than anything you get us because I know what it is to travel with 3 kids. You know, like that's the gift.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Everything of mine is like,
I'm going to start publishing our videos, so you need to be more professional on the camera.
gotta brush my hair and
do
stuff.
Your hair and makeup.
I don't know what's gonna happen.
T-shirts.
TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
You swear?
If I'm lying, I'm dying.
This is the mindset.
Free.
This is the mantra.
Free!
This is the mindset.
With movies like Interstellar, Dreamgirls, and Gladiator.
Are you not entertained?
And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free. Huzzah! Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.